All right, so in learning objectives 7 and 8 here, which we're going to kind of take together, we're going to take a look at different explanations of what causes these business cycles, the shift in labor demand, and also try to explore this idea of a multiplier, which sort of explains how an initial shock is sort of amplified and causes a much bigger decrease in employment and real GDP than what happened just with the initial shock. So in our model, and this is really true in reality, the key driver of a business cycle is a shift to the left in labor demand. So that is what is driving the business cycle. And so we want to kind of remember, and we talked about this before, what shifts labor demand? And the answer is labor demand is determined by the value of the marginal product. So the marginal product of labor, to kind of remind ourselves, marginal product of labor is the extra output I get for each extra additional unit of labor. It's the extra output from each extra unit of labor. Right, so if I add one worker, how much additional output do they produce for me? That would be my marginal product of labor. And as a company, right, when I decide, do I want to hire that worker? So if I'm, I have a car wash, for example, I'm going to say, okay, how many extra car washes can this worker make for me each day? Let's say that's 5. And then I'm going to say, well, how much does each car wash sell for? That's $5. Then that extra worker makes me $25. That's the value of their marginal product, the price times the marginal product of labor. So if labor demand goes down, it's because the value of the marginal product has gone down. So that means either the price or the marginal product of labor has changed. And so we're going to really focus on changes in the marginal product of labor and have some competing explanations for what causes that marginal product of labor to go down, which would shift labor demand to the left. So our first explanation is what is called real business cycle theory, or RBC. And the idea of that is to use this notion of technology that we had discussed when we talked about economic growth, which is say I have capital and I have labor, and I combine those to produce output. And A is sort of this intangible thing that tells me how good is this economy at combining capital and labor to produce output. So to give you an example, take the U.S. economy to Zimbabwe. So U.S. economy produces much more output than does Zimbabwe. Several reasons for that. One is we have more capital. However, if you gave Zimbabwe exactly the same capital and labor that we have, they wouldn't produce as much output. The reason is they don't have the same processes or technology to combine that capital and labor to produce output. So that's what A represents. And the real business cycle theory hypothesizes that it's shocks or changes in that A technology that are the source of business cycles. So the idea here is that A goes down, and that is what decreases the marginal product of labor. Now you might ask, when I think of technology, that makes perfect sense to think about economic growth. So as the economy grows over time, I can definitely see how our innovations would cause us to use capital and labor more effectively. But it's weird to think of us as being able to use it less effectively for a period of time. And there's lots of ways that you could think about this. Our current coronavirus pandemic is a great example, right? So if you think about right now, we have the same capital, we have the same labor, right? The fundamentals of our economy haven't really changed, but all of a sudden we're able to produce less stuff. Now, why is that? Well, in one sense, there's been kind of a big shift around in what types of resources are needed, right? So you have these, what I call sort of sectoral shocks. Which says all of a sudden we used to have restaurants, and now restaurants aren't in particular productive given their capital and labor, but food delivery service is, right? So let's say I used to work as a cook at a restaurant, and now I want to go work for Shipt as delivering groceries, right? Although I can eventually make that shift, I'm going to be less productive in the meantime. So you can get these big movements around in the economy, and as things have to reshuffle and work itself out, as resources move from different parts of the economy and need retraining, etc., that could take some time. And in the meantime, we could be temporarily less productive. So that could be a shock to technology. You could also think of it as just simply a sort of demand shock. Meaning, I own a restaurant, I have the same capital and labor that I had before, but people don't want to eat at the restaurant. That would look like, in the data, a TFP shock or a technology shock, because I have the same capital and labor, but I can't produce as much output. So that's the idea of real business cycle theory, is to focus on the decrease in the marginal product of labor and to hypothesize that it comes from a change in our ability to combine capital and labor to produce output. All right, so up next, we will have a look at our Keynesian theory of changes in labor demand.